I'm James Howell, and this is 11th Heaven Critical Suplex, an extended look at Grasshopper Manufacture's 2007 game No More Heroes, written and directed by Suda51. Heaven 6, Let's Shake with Brennan Williams, Shogun of the Row. I don't have much by way of prologue, so we're gonna zip through this. There we go. For this video, I'd like to put No More Heroes in conversation with Suda51's major debut in the West, Killer 7. By looking at these games together, I'm not focusing on narrative, and I'm not using the story of one to explain the other. I'm also not suggesting that they share a coherent fictional universe or timeline. The focus here is different. Killer 7 was part of Grasshopper Manufacture's Kill the Past series of games. Flower, Sun, and Rain on the Nintendo DS was the only other game from that series that saw official English localization, a third as-yet unlocalized game being the Silver Case, and No More Heroes doesn't appear to be part of that loose canon of stories. That's actually cool here because we can find some different ideas at work because of that detachment. I do place Killer 7 and No More Heroes on a continuum, though, Grasshopper's first two games with an international audience. As the second of the two, No More Heroes acknowledges that relationship with some visual and acoustic references. As a first example, the screen blinks like a camera shutter when you press the C button to orient the camera in Travis's direction. And Killer 7 uses that same visual effect when the player goes into first-person view for combat.
This is too easy.
A dynamic sound effect plays when you press the Z button to super accelerate Travis's bike. And this is the same sound effect you get when activating the Smith's special abilities, like Khan's sprinting or Kevin's invisibility.
Dangerous.
I identify a third acoustic reference in No More Heroes, which is our focus for this video. The reference to Killer 7's song Rave On implied in No More Heroes' recurring theme. I'll play the two back to back so you can hear the similarities. No More Heroes' musical theme comes across as a crooked version of Rave On. If we understand No More Heroes' musical theme as a reference to Rave On, I think this reinforces the game's characterization of gamers as impatient and only interested in self-gratification. The comparison becomes meaningful if we consider what Rave On meant in Killer 7. Killer 7 was an adventure game with action elements, whereas No More Heroes is an action game with adventure elements. That's the distinction that I draw. And this difference comes out in each game's pacing. In Killer 7, players were asked to stand still and listen to monologues from supporting characters like Travis and Iwazaru. Even the shooting combat had a passive quality since players stood in one place waiting for enemies to close in. The club sequence, called the Vinculum Gate in-game, prepared players for the mini-boss fights. The setting dramatized Harmon's and Kunlan's conflict, which they described as dancing.
Let's dance.
When the Smiths enter the club, Harmon and Kunlan are about to dance by pitting their specialized fighters against each other. Combat reaches an intense pitch here, and Rave On becomes a symbol, in a sense, of the spirit of those encounters as distinct from the rest of the game's more relaxed pace.
Hurts, doesn't it?
Some of the most vocal complaints about Killer 7 focused on the game's pacing and somewhat aloof combat style. They seem to ask for a more twitchy fun game, instead of a thematically dense story that's told in part through the control scheme. Many gamers wanted a less oblique, more normal game. When No More Heroes describes gamers as impatient and only desiring quick gratification, the game appears to respond to those complaints.
I know a lot of gamers out there don't have much patience. At least that's what Bishop, the dude at the video store, said.
Killer 7 was dripping with intrigue, and No More Heroes offers accessible violence at the expense of intrigue. Travis's motivations are superficial, expected, and trite. He wants to be number one, and he wants to get laid, motivations which are far removed from Killer 7's density. The game combines twitchy violence with the definition of gamers as only capable of appreciating twitchy violence. So we can see No More Heroes as a backhanded appeasement of those criticisms. No More Heroes takes a crooked, sarcastic version of Rave On as its theme. It simultaneously satisfies and mocks the desire for action symbolized by Rave On's placement in Killer 7. And it does so at the expense of anything like Killer 7's slower-paced story, sideways storytelling, and obtuse critique of international relations. The acoustic reference reinforces the game's social critique. And now I'm going to step over to the interview mic and speak with this episode's guest. Today I'm speaking with Brennan Williams, aka Marcellus Black, Shogun of the Row, pro wrestler and former pro football player for the Jaguars and the Texans. Brennan, welcome and thank you for joining me today.
Hey James, thanks for having me.
As a practiced wrestler and a lover of animes, there's clearly a lot of overlap between you and Travis Touchdown. How did you find or first encounter the character?
Funny story about me and this game. I think this game came out when I was in college and I didn't have my Wii. I didn't bring it with me. So my experience with these games, both of them are from YouTube Let's Plays because I thought it was cool and I wanted to see what they were about, but I never actually played them myself. So.
Kind of ironic because like the way Travis does his wrestling is he learns it from watching videotapes.
Exactly.
So kind of a connection there. What was your impression of the game, like viewing it from Let's Plays?
Well, I initially got into it just because I saw it and I was like, well, this is really right up my alley. It's the whole otaku culture. It's the whole wrestling thing. The guy's last name is Touchdown. It's like this game is about me.
I didn't even the connection. That's good. Yeah, Touchdown is kind of gives him that all-American kind of tweak there.
Right.
So, but yes, at the times we've spoken, you've been pretty conversant in kind of the lingo and some of the franchises and stuff like that of anime and that sort of thing. So it sounds like you've been into kind of like otaku stuff for quite a while.
Yeah, pretty much as long as I can remember. I've always been more of a anime and video games guy than I was a sports guy. And that's kind of the funny thing is when I got into wrestling, people were like, "Oh, he's not going to know anything because he's a football player." There's always, whenever a football player comes into wrestling, there's always kind of like this learning curve. It's not so good. But I was like, I was a bigger wrestling fan than I was a football fan, so it worked out a little bit easier for me.
Did your like wrestling and anime interests sort of parallel each other? Yeah,
those were my things. I think my Twitter profile always used to say when I played, it used to be like, 6'7" Japanese weeb that loves waifu pillows and all that stuff and wrestling. And I also play pro football, kind of thing.
That's great. I didn't see that when that was up there, but that's fantastic. What kind of anime stuff were you into? Was there like a particular genre or a particular kind of story?
I like everything. Any kind of thing. Your moe blobs, your action stuff, your shonens. Actually, if there's anything I don't love, it's the long running shonen type shows. I've always said that I like my shows to end in like a season or two. So the longer type stuff I never really got really into. But
like
other than that,
Naruto kind of stuff?
Exactly. Aside from Dragon Ball Z, which everybody watched at that time, I just never really had time to keep up with a show that went on that long. And I didn't want to get invested in it when they usually just get bad.
I remember my little brother really loved Dragon Ball Z, and he would send away for bootlegs of Dragon Ball Z that had been fan translated.
The good old days.
Yeah, right. And I would buy, like, I remember I went to an anime convention back in 2000, and I bought a bunch of bootleg OVAs of Miyazaki stuff before it was picked up by Disney. Yeah, I was into Miyazaki before it was cool. Well, or rather before it was licensed. But then a bunch of, like, the old JoJo's OVAs.
Oh, the yeah, those are great.
Oh man, like
those are something else.
Oh, they're special. Like the last 3 story arcs.
Yeah, just cram them all in there.
Right.
What do we have? 2 hours? Yeah.
Only people who have read the manga will know the difference.
Exactly.
And honestly, they're going to be so grateful it's here, they're not going to care.
Yeah.
How did you get access to that stuff when you were?
When I was a kid, I think it started for me the same way it kind of started for everybody with whatever was on TV. At some point, I realized that there was a certain kind of style that was coming from these Japanese cartoons that wasn't kind of the same for other things. So I guess I had a couple different phases of my anime progression, and the first one would have been the Toonami stage where you're watching just watching all of them, whatever's on Cartoon Network and Adult Swim shortly after. After that, then I had to become an elitist. And I went back and I watched all the classic old stuff that came out from before I was born, so that I could look down at all the other filthy peeps at Anime Boston at the time when this is where I'm from. So
Boston, you said?
Yeah, I'm from Boston.
Okay.
So that was baby's first anime convention was Anime Boston, and when I got into my elitist phase, then it was all about just look at these filthy peasants with their Naruto headbands. They don't know anything about Ghost in the Shell and Akira. Yeah, but at some point, I think it was when they started putting stuff on Adult Swim, stuff that was not exactly simulcast between here and Japan, but maybe a season behind, stuff that wasn't, there was more to watch. And actually, I think the first one I did was Naruto. I was watching Naruto and I was like, oh, there's more of this. I could just watch it. And that's when I started watching stuff by less than legal means on the internet.
Right, which that's kind of the way it winds up building momentum.
Yeah, and then it's all downhill from there. But I'm clean now. Been Crunchyroll for the past 5 years or so I'm good. Nobody can come after me. But
here's my cred. When I put up a tweet about this a little while ago, where I found my old notebook of JoJo's manga translations, and this was back in the day before there were any scanned edits. So I would have my imported JoJo's manga held open in my right hand. And I would have this 3-ring binder of just line printout text translations in my left. And I would just hold them close together to try to imagine what the English text would look like in the box. And I actually there was an old message board forum, a Higher Voltage, that I was a part of, and that forum actually was doing a bunch of they were the first people doing the scanned edits of the JoJo's manga. And I am proud to say that I am responsible for bringing the Vanilla Ice arc.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yep, that's I was there in the trenches.
In the trenches.
Yep. Translating.
That's right. So I guess I have you to thank for stuff like that. Then you're a real OG. So were you also responsible for Dwang?
Oh goodness. No, Dwang, I don't think anybody is responsible for Dwang. I think Dwang is the art style of the Renaissance or Gothic architecture. There's nobody to really point to as responsible for Dwang. It's just the zeitgeist that emerges that you're just kind of in awe of.
I can't wait for 50 years from now when college students are sitting in a lecture hall talking about the Dwang period. The way you just described it. I'm so excited for the future.
But in terms of like anime and stuff like that, and connecting to the pro wrestling, I mean, it kind of makes sense that I mean, I guess you're kind of in your final form right now, since you have successfully integrated that into a kind of pro wrestling performance persona.
Well, my biggest thing is I've always described when I talk about wrestling to with my Twitter followers, I've always had, you know, maybe 1% people who follow me for football, and then like 50, maybe 60 follow me for anime, and then the rest follow me for wrestling. So when I'm, you know, describing, I'm always talking about wrestling. So when I'm describing wrestling to the uninitiated, the anime fan, I always describe it as wrestling at its best is just anime in real life. Like I always describe that, like, Dragon Ball Z is just a really well booked wrestling storyline. The way, you know, you got your good guys, you got your faces, you got your heels, you're building new stars. Gohan is like the new star that's getting built up in the Cell arc, and Cell puts him over, and Goku puts him over. It's all wrestling. So the gap is so small, and I've noticed with a lot of like hardcore wrestling fans, they also happen to be, you know, fans of anime or at least comic books or something like that.
Huh. That makes perfect sense, but I never would have thought to make that connection on my own.
Oh yeah, they're the same. Especially if you watch like Kinnikuman, Ultimate Muscle, or, you know, the shows that are actually about the anime shows that are actually about wrestling.
Right.
Just like, I mean, they're wrestling. They're in a wrestling ring, but they're just doing anime stuff.
Drawing that line from wrestling to anime, and even overlapping it like you're talking about, that's a great way of bringing people into the headspace, especially for people who, you know, might be a little embarrassed at home because no one gets their interest, they have to play it down, and nice to have somebody who's clearing the path for them and just owning it openly.
Yeah, no, I completely see that. I do that, and I am a big, cool black guy. So, by all means, I probably shouldn't, but... But I think my Twitter profile says like irredeemable weeb or something like that. You take that mantle and you wear it proudly.
Oh yeah, no, it's like as soon as you own it, it's like it's yours. Which is easier to do now up front because it's more mainstream. But yeah, I mean, some people get there by fits and starts. You know, you disown ironically, and then you love, no matter who understands that love. But yeah, you were saying about the drama, how there's newcomers and...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, don't even get me started on character relations. It's all the same.
That's kind of, in No More Heroes, that's really Travis's story arc. By happenstance and haphazardness, he kind of winds up at the bottom of the ranks. He's the new blood, and he's ostentatious enough to challenge the ones above. So his rise really is...
Oh, totally. And Suda51 is outspokenly a wrestling fan, and you can tell he's influenced by Lucha Libre and Puro, which is wrestling in Japan. And I mean, you could see that in any of his games. They have German suplexes and tiger bombs and all kinds of stuff and whatever. So
yeah. Are you familiar with Fire Pro Wrestling Special?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where it's like
He worked on that, right?
Yeah, he wrote the story. I mean, it's a meteoric rise from hero to zero, but he loses every meaningful relationship he has and kills himself when you win. That's
the thing with wrestling is, it can be so over the top, but I've been taught now that I've been doing it is everything. We call it selling it for the cheap seats. So the guy who's in the furthest away in the arena can see what you're doing. Every punch, you wind up and you make sure everybody knows you're about to punch him. You don't punch, from the inside like you're in a real fight. That's not theatrical enough. So when it comes to storylines and characters, you need to be so over the top that somebody flipping through the channels watches your entrance and I say, I know exactly what that guy is. I'm going to cheer for him. I'm going to boo him, whatever. So there's these universal principles, these character principles that, it seems over the top when you're watching it and stuff doesn't always make sense, but it's just boiled down so that, anybody can understand it. It's not hard to understand, that guy, everybody's dying. He's having a tough time.
And in terms of No More Heroes, that's really the way that the story is somewhat deceptively presented, which is this sort of like just broadcasting, "Hi, I'm Travis Touchdown. I want to be number one and I want to score." And that is like the entirety of his character that's presented, and it's just like every time you see him, it's like it just signal boosts.
He's this loser that we're supposed to relate to.
Yeah, exactly.
He's got, I'm sure anybody could find one of their flaws in this character, and that instantly kind of, you identify with Travis, and you understand kind of, in all the grossness as I watch him, you identify with that. That's not necessarily something you see in every game.
Yeah, and it also works, and I'm actually curious what your opinion is on how this sort of like overlaps into wrestling. Everybody I've spoken with who likes Travis, this winds up being kind of the majority consensus of like Travis's one redeeming quality as a human being, is that everybody looks at somebody who's trying his best, and you're rooting for him, because it's like everyone knows what it's like to be out there, to be in an unfamiliar situation, whether you're putting on that game face or that braggadocio or whatever, he's still trying his best and trying to achieve something, and everybody seems to relate to that.
Yeah. Well, I think, and it kind of goes back to wrestling like everything does. I've seen that one of the hardest things in wrestling is being a good, just purely good, lawful good wrestler. That white meat baby face, top of the line. Because if you sell it in such a way that it doesn't come off as believable, then people can't relate to you. And if people can't relate to you, they boo you. And that's the worst. I mean, it's not the worst thing. As long as you're getting a reaction, it's fine. But if you want to be that good guy, you just want everybody, I want you to do great. And it's so interesting and that's kind of the trend now, is there's so few just good guys. There are always these cool bad guys, or these flawed good guys that you're supposed to be like, oh, yeah, I can relate to this guy, so I can root for him, kind of thing.
Right. I noticed that with some of the ways that you kind of curate your I'm going to call it persona, which I don't mean to use that to indicate that it's like in any way disingenuous. But
I am not actually a Shogun, so it's
oh my
fine.
God,
it's going to be hard for you to believe, but yeah.
One single tear rolling down my face. You hear the sound of glass cracking. No, but yeah, like I've noticed that in terms of like how you cultivate your persona, which is that you do try to maintain. I guess I'm going to call it like kind of an atmosphere of goodness.
I mean, you are right. I am a good guy, and by all accounts, where I work at, they like their good guys good and their bad guys bad, which isn't necessarily how it is everywhere, but it's how it is here. Right. So, that's one of the things I'm finding is really hard, because not only am I a good guy, I'm also literally the biggest guy here, and I've always found, that it's easier to root for a smaller guy going against a big guy, because that's the underdog. Everybody wants to root for the underdog.
Right.
So what's hard for me psychologically is coming off as both that good guy underdog and also being, this big, strong, larger than life figure. When I came up with my persona, my gimmick, I was always told that the best characters are the person who's playing it turned up to 11, because they don't have any trouble throwing it out into the world, because I understand that kind of thing. And what is a big weeb's what is my final form, right? And I'm a Street Fighter character. There's not a whole lot to it. So and I think that because like we were talking about with that self-deprecating weeb culture kind of thing, it's almost this weird meta ironic gimmick where I'm cool but I shouldn't be, but people like it because they like those things, so it's really popular. And Booker T, who's my trainer, he runs the promotion.
Yeah,
he doesn't get it. Like, he's like, it's gotten to the point where I've got kind of free reign to do whatever I want, because he doesn't understand why people love it, but they do. So it's like, just I don't care, kid. Do whatever you need to do. It's awesome. So, it's funny from that standpoint. He allowed it in the first place because he's big into kung fu movies.
Oh.
So, at the end of the day, people who like kung fu movies are the weebs of the 70s.
Yeah.
So, like, when I explained it to him in terms, because I like kung fu movies too, I explained it to him in terms of kung fu movies. I was like, this is my character. I'm like, I'm like such and such from this and such from that. That's what I'm going to be. And, it's going to kind of be like this kind of pseudo video game type thing. I'm going to call myself the secret final boss of the reality of wrestling and stuff like that. He's like, okay, cool. So he doesn't know why people react the way they do, but he does. I mean, he likes the stuff.
I did notice that you enter with the Akuma giant prayer beads.
Oh, yeah. You want to hear a funny story about those?
I do.
Those are just styrofoam balls spray painted black on a yarn.
I actually wonder that. I thought, well, if those are really prayer beads of that size, I don't think Brennan would have much trouble lifting them off with that little effort. But
yeah, it's pretty light.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I didn't know where to. It came out of necessity because I had a guy who was making my tights, and my tights still aren't done. But
really,
yeah, they're not. I mean, they're right now. I just wear black tights and red kick pad covers.
Okay, because you were definitely wearing tights when I
Oh
watched.
Yeah, I had tights. I wasn't out there naked or anything. They're rental tights essentially.
Oh, okay, I follow. I gotcha.
And so basically, I was out there. There's nothing to them. There's no character. So what I ended up doing was I was like, I got to do something, otherwise I'm just gonna look like a scrub out there. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna go on Amazon. I'm gonna buy a kimono robe. It's just the kind you would wear around your house, I guess. It's actually for women. And right. I'm going to make some prayer beads, and I'm going to do the face paint. That's going to be my over the top thing.
That's great, and that's kind of perfect in so many ways because, kind of like, though this is not on the same this is not a gaffe on the same level, but like going out there and wearing a women's kimono for an audience that obviously would not have a frame of reference for knowing.
Oh yeah, no, it's hilarious.
Some people who think like, oh man, ideographs are cool. I'm gonna have like a kanji like tattooed on my shoulder or whatever, and it's like the kanji for bread.
Yeah, exactly. It's appropriation in just the jankest way, which is also why I think a lot of people like the gimmick, because they can see if you can see that stuff.
The way that Travis portrays wrestling, it reminds me of the kind of a truism about movies. Like movies are just real life with all the boring parts cut out.
Yeah, and
it's like he does like he'll do like he'll do like punch combos, but it's always building up to the power move. And
it's not even appropriation. It's whenever you see somebody, you see two kids in the locker room playing wrestling. You don't necessarily know all of and that's what I learned pretty quickly when I started wrestling, was you don't necessarily know all the technical aspects of it. But if you're a fan and you watch something enough, there's going to be certain things that you can see and mimic, and, you pick up the cool things that you like. And that's definitely, you see Travis, he's doing German suplexes. He's doing the cool moves.
Right.
He's not chaining. He's not doing a wrist lock and reversing it into a hammer lock, and he's not sitting there doing all the meticulous stuff. He's doing the impact stuff, the stuff that you would finish somebody off of.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, I did have another question I wanted to ask you about character playing and sort of like the type of character that you sort of build through the Shogun. You obviously, you are no stranger to playing characters. You've as you mentioned before, you've LARPed. I know you and I have had a couple of tabletop gaming sessions together, and you played different characters each time. So you got a lot of experience there. You've shown versatility. Is the Shogun just another role-playing character? And I mean, not just another one because there's a different context for it, but is it the same kind of thing along the same spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, more or less. What I wanted to do when I came up with the character was I wanted to, the same way I come up with a character for a tabletop game, I wanted to come up with a backstory. I wanted motivations, because when you know those things, you can talk about those things. And I could go into a promo right now about anybody from, my promotion, and I'd know exactly, if I'd like them, why I wouldn't like them, what I would want to do to them or whatever, because I understand the character and I understand the motivation. And it's the same way in tabletop or LARP or anything like that. So I've also heard wrestling be called a long-running LARP. So that also makes a lot of sense.
And that makes perfect sense. I totally see that.
Long-form live-action roleplay. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I remember having heard you mention that, kind of the face paint is a big thing. In terms of assuming the character, assuming the presence of the character. And I was noticing that's actually interesting about kind of the kind of wrestling that Travis likes. I mean, Travis likes a lot of these the flashy power moves, the finishing moves, and stuff like that. But the specific kind of wrestling that he's in, I mean, he's super into Lucha Libre.
Yeah.
And he gathers. You go around town and you find these wrestling cards, which are kind of like collectible baseball cards. Travis gets a replica of that wrestler's mask, and you can also flip through, I can just totally imagine one of those old Topps
booster packs.
Yeah, exactly. And he's got them in his mint condition plastic sleeves, and you can flip through them, and it gives you the name of the wrestlers, and you can kind of imagine a backstory and stuff. This was this wrestler's early years, and it's Muerte 00, and then there's Muerte 99.
Yeah. No, what's funny about Lucha Libre, and which makes a lot of sense in the context of No More Heroes, is Lucha Libre more than, I say wrestling is anime. Lucha Libre is straight up comic books. There's a promotion on TV now called Lucha Underground, and they've got a time traveling arc going on.
What?
Yeah, no, for real. They've got a guy who is a dragon from the center of the earth, and that is, they don't explain it. That's exactly what he is.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So, luchadors especially, and because that sport, it's a religion in Mexico. It goes back, and this is something that, if I'm from Mexico and I'm a Lucha Libre fan, my great-grandfather was a Lucha Libre fan, kind of thing.
Right.
So, but not only that, if my great-grandfather's favorite wrestler was, I don't know, who's a good example, Blue Demon or El Santo, now you literally have El Santo's son, or El Santo's son's son, that is wrestling now as El Santo 3 or El Santo 2 or whatever. So there's these lineages, and they build these legendary stories. Like El Santo was I believe his backstory was that he was a wrestling priest. His name is the Saint. So he ran an orphanage, and he was a legit celebrity. Yeah. So that all that stuff takes on so much more meaning when it's in the Lucha Libre form, really.
Yeah. Okay. That's a distinction I was not aware of. I mean, I knew generally that the pageantry was I guess I want to say amplified. Because I mean, you of course have your kind of your own version of a lucha mask because you wear the face paint. But that, I don't know, it's still a little bit different because your facial features are still distinguishable, whereas a lucha mask is total anonymity.
And they always wear it. If they're at a movie, they wear it.
Yeah.
You see these pictures of these old luchadors in the 70s, and they're wearing suits, and they're all together at a dinner, and they have their masks on. I think that's the coolest thing.
Have you seen? This is also kind of a thing when Killer 7 came out. Suda51, for all of his press conferences, he would just show up for all the promotional stuff wearing a lucha mask.
Of course.
I always felt maybe because Killer 7 gets pretty... It gets quasi-critical of Japanese politics, which is... that's a tough topic to tackle in a Japanese video game. And I kind of always wondered if, like, that was kind of his sort of testing the waters. Like, am I going to get the crap kicked out of me on the street for having...
Are the Yakuza going to pick me up and take me away?
If you see my mask, like, in the gutter, you know what happened. Well, that brings us to the end of Let's Shake, the boss who gets no attention from Travis and apparently no attention from us. Brennan, thank you again very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, James.
See you next time, everyone.